Hello, this is your host Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fight podcast. I'm joined by Logos for our first episode of Weekend Review. So we were talking about, what sort of programs we might be able to run, and we talk a lot in private about current events, and it just seemed natural that there's going to be no shortage of content in the news for quite some time, to take advantage of that and start talking about current events. And we'll start with probably the biggest current event news in the last week is Ukraine. So, Ukraine, even Western media is finally beginning to admit that Ukraine is losing. Not Brzezinski, Kissinger said that Ukraine can't win this and that Zelensky's going to have to give territory to Russia. What's interesting here is that as of June 10th, in an aide to the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, Mikhail Podolyak, said that Ukraine is losing between 100 to 200 troops a day in battle. Zelensky says they're losing about 100 in battle and 500 injured each day in the Donbass. And Podolyak says that one of the reasons why Russia's inflicting such a high amount of casualties is a complete lack of parity between the Ukrainian and Russian forces, specifically with regards to artillery. And so he recommends that the West send 300 multiple rocket launchers to Ukraine. Now, in also recent days, the M77 air mobile artillery platform, 152 millimeter gun, capable of firing precision guided munitions, has been delivered to Ukraine, as well as the HIMARS, which is a multiple rocket launch system, but apparently not in the numbers that Ukraine says that they need. And we know that Russia never actually gets rid of its obsolete weapon systems; it just has them in reserve. So Russia can probably just open up with hundreds and hundreds of artillery pieces that, even if they're technically obsolete, make up for the fact that they can saturate any battle space with, thousands and if not hundreds of thousands of rounds. One of the reasons why Russia's using these heavier barrages is because while the Western media could be accused of exaggerating to some extent the success of man-portable ATGMs like the Javelin and the NLAW against Russian units, it still punishes aggressive armored warfare to a degree where they're going to have to first prepare the way with heavy artillery barrages, which are classic Russian military procedure going back to World War II. I mean, this isn't something that's new. It's just that I think Russia expected a somewhat shorter conflict, in which case more of a blitzkrieg was in mind. And at this point, it seems to be that they're settling in for a more hands gloves off approach, especially once the Ukrainians just put up such a stiff resistance. They're like, fine, we're just gonna, you know, continue to bombard you with continuous assaults. Also, the Lugansk region at this point is more or less completely under Russian control, and Donetsk is mostly under Russian control. And since the end of the Kiev attacks in April, Russia's been in the process of repositioning its northern front forces to the southeast and the southern fronts. And we're still in the process of that maneuvering. So right now, Russia and Ukraine, it's a bit of a pause in the fighting. There haven't been a lot of major moves yet, but in the Donetsk, the Russians are continuing to consolidate with small skirmish battles around Ukrainian forces they have attempted to encircle, and the Ukrainians have attempted to launch an attack on Kherson in the south in order to spoil against the Russians. I think what we can expect to see is if the Ukrainians don't come to some sort of settlement, Russia will make a push on Odessa and link up with Transnistria.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on here, right? So, I mean, I don't even know where to start with this. I mean, the first thing I'm wondering is like the U.S. is giving Ukraine. The U.S. is giving Ukraine like tons and tons and tons of advanced weapons, and I've been hearing the news about how like some of them are being sold on the dark net or something. But let's not speculate to that degree. What if some of them just end up in Russian hands? So the U.S. has its proprietary like Javelin missile system or something. Russia gets a hold of one. Maybe Russia can't build anything with it. They sent it to China, and China's getting darn good at reverse engineering stuff, right? And if Russia, China, Iran, all of them are setting up an alliance, like the U.S. basically just like sending a bunch of massive weapons to Ukraine to fight Russia. I mean, what kind of long term consequences is that going to have?
Well, yeah, and it's also like, well, what is it about? Why would we have these high value weapons even in the position where they could be taken by the Russians? But then you look back at what happened last year in Afghanistan and Kabul, and it's like, yeah, we let $80 billion worth of U.S. equipment fall into the hands of the Taliban. We don't seem to care if our enemies get up to date, top of the line weapon systems, which is bizarre. Now, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, like the U.S. doesn't have a numbers advantage. The only advantage the US has is just like spending per capita on military technology and things like that. And if we give up our technological advantage to let enemies reverse engineer the weapons we've got, I mean, we're just done. We'll just be enemies will have roughly on par with our technology, but with like way more soldiers. And there's just no way the US can be world police if that happens.
Exactly. Now, just to briefly describe why the Javelin is so uh, revolutionary and how Russia does not yet have that capability. The the Javelin is important in that it has a top attack mode. So it homes in on the infrared signal of a tank and it attacks. Normally, when you fire a missile at a tank, you fire it straight at a vertical line, either through a laser sighting system or a thermal tracking system, and it just hits the armor head on. So you're hitting it where the tank is best protected.
Right.
With the Javelin, it comes in at an angle and drops it on the tank's turret, which is the one of the most vulnerable parts of the tank. And furthermore, now this is becoming more common amongst missiles. It has a tandem explosive. So the first explosive detonates the reactive armor, which are basically plates that explode outward into an incoming missile to diffuse its impact. And then there's a second explosive charge that is more powerful that then hits that spot on the tank. Now the Russians with their Cornet missiles don't have the ability to do a top attack, and so they're forced to. And because it's a tripod system that you have to set up, unless it's placed on a vehicle, you have to also set it up, which means it's going to be harder for you to get flanking shots on tanks because of the setup and its lack of mobility, so that it's less likely to be able to find the soft spots. The Javelin is also fire and forget. So once you fire it, you can move from position immediately. Whereas with a wire guided system like the TOW or a laser guided system like the Cornet, you have to have somebody constantly looking at the target, controlling the targeting system so that it can get there. The Javelin's fire and forget. You can just fire and move. So it's a revolutionary system that if the Russians can reverse engineer the Chinese, pretty much closes the missile gap when it comes to tactical missiles.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too I was thinking of while you were describing what's going on in Ukraine is just the concept of escalation, right? Like when Russia attacked Ukraine, it's like, yeah, war's brutal, people die, things are bad, but you don't have like aircraft flying overseas leveling them, levels of bad, right? But it's like we send the Ukrainians a bunch of weapons. Like, okay, this will hold off the Russian tank. This will hold off conventional invading forces. But Russia still has goals they want to achieve. And so if we send like javelin missiles and things like that to like escalate one level above conventional on the ground invasion, why would we not expect that Russia would get desperate and try like really crazy stuff? It's like, why wouldn't you expect mass shelling? It's just like you can't send in tanks, you can't send in direct assault forces. So the only thing you can do is bomb enemy defensive positions to the Stone Ages, and then when they're softened up, rush them before they can kind of regroup. And that seems to be, from what little I've been able to see of the war, exactly what Russia's doing, and apparently it's being pretty successful. And that leads into the other part of this, which is like they're saying every time I look at the news, it's just like, oh yeah, Russia's losing like 2,000 people a day, and soldiers are mass mutinying, and all the people in Russia are finding out how bad they're losing, and there's widespread chaos in Russia. And it's just like, wow, that sounds terrible. And then you see like Henry Kissinger come out and be like, yeah, Ukraine's about to lose. It's like, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Every day for the past like 4 weeks, I've just been seeing how terrible Russia is. They're on the ropes, they're losing, everything's awful. And now I'm seeing top official after top official, CIA, Army, you name it, coming out and being like, yeah, we don't know how longer Ukraine can hold out, guys. It's like, what do you think the reaction from people is going to be when, if and when Ukraine actually goes, yeah, we give up, we lose?
Yeah, I know. And these so in order to deal with the artillery disadvantage, there have been talks, like I said, of the M77 and HIMARS being deployed. Now, what makes the M77 interesting is that it has the ability to fire guided shells. So also rocket assisted shells that have an extended range as well. But those are really expensive, like high end stuff that it's unlikely the Ukrainians will be able to afford in large numbers. The main disadvantage of the M77 is that the Russian guns already outrange it. So unless it's using these specialized shells, it's outranged. Uh, the benefit would be, though, even without those shells, it's got better optics, so it's more accurate and can drop shells on target. But it all depends on how many of these guns the Ukrainians have, and if they just get blown away by Russian saturation attacks. And the HIMARS are basically multiple rocket launch systems, so their goal is to just launch salvos of rockets. But Russia has gobs of those, gobs of multiple rocket launch systems. They can just saturate whole areas with missiles, and again, in order to reach, you would take a lot more than the U.S. is willing to give to reach parity with Russia in artillery. Like with their tanks, Russia never gets rid of obsolete equipment. They just keep it in reserve for mothball. And so they have huge amounts of artillery in reserve that, well, it won't be state of the art. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, of course it doesn't have to be, right? Like, this is what people don't understand. It's like, oh yeah, big bad Russia doing so much damage in Ukraine, but look at this old equipment they're getting destroyed with and whatever. It's like, I think they're trying to keep as much of the infrastructure in Ukraine as intact as possible. That way, if they took it, they could get some use out of it, right? But if they have a goal there that's being so thwarted that they just decide to turn everything to glass because they're just done, like, I don't know what people expect to happen. Like, what we've been seeing with Russia is kid gloves. And now it seems like the gloves are starting to come off. Now we're probably going to see more aircraft. We're probably going to see more artillery. I don't think the UN's succeeded in getting a no-fly zone over Ukraine yet. So, like, if Russia gets truly desperate in doing something, then they're about to see, like, really how horrifying Russia could be if it wanted to. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah. And also in this last week, the city of Severodonetsk was taken in the Donbass, which brings Russia closer to complete control. Now, one of the reasons why the fighting has been going on so long in the Donbass is Russia has been attempting to encircle the Ukrainian forces and cut off their supplies so that when they can finally, seal their escape, they'll just be trapped like cats in a bag, and then you can take them out at your own leisure. And that seems to be what Russia's strategy is right now. And the Ukrainian troops in the Donbass are suffering terribly. Like they said, anywhere from 100 to 200 dying a day, and they're running out of supplies. This is not. And as we saw with Mariupol, Russia is willing to level a city to the ground if they put up a serious fight and they don't surrender in any reasonable amount of time. They'll flatten the city.
yeah.
So it's I don't want to say the Russians are on par with the Mongols, but it's that kind of like Mongol warning. It's like, look, guys, we this is it. You either surrender or we'll just level your city to the ground.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I had a thought I was going to go with this, but I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, you might think of it later. The other thing that happened is that Lavrov was supposed to fly to a conference in Serbia, which meant he would have to fly over Romania, a NATO nation, which then denied him access over their airspace. And Lavrov was unable to go. He had to cancel the the diplomatic envoy to Serbia. So Now this is new, right? Like so when the Soviets invaded Ukraine 40 or no Ukraine, Afghanistan 40 years ago, we didn't stop flights of Soviet diplomats. We didn't say, "Oh, sorry, you're invading Afghanistan. Can't fly over a European country." Because of course Reagan was meeting with Gorbachev during those times in Iceland and other places. But now we're like, no, you can't fly over our airspace to get to these countries. This is definitely an escalation of relations with Russia, which is going to show that I don't think. Well, okay, I don't think we can walk this back to a pre Cold War 2.0 situation. We are in the Cold War 2.0, very close to a hot war in Ukraine between NATO and Russian forces. But yeah, I don't think whatever happens, you can walk it back.
Yeah, definitely. That's another thing I was going to say is I think when you first told me this, the first thing I said to you was, what if the guy just like flies or just sends a decoy and pretends that he's flying and just like dares NATO to shoot him down? Like suppose NATO does shoot down a Russian minister. Like if all of the non-NATO places needed a justification to like form a formal alliance against NATO, NATO shooting a diplomat of a country would be a pretty good way to start that. I mean, what happened in World War I, right? Archduke Ferdinand gets assassinated or something. All it's going to take is an itchy trigger finger killing the wrong politician, and the entire world goes, okay, NATO's gone too far. We are all going to team up to put a stop to this. You already see, I think it was Nicaragua. I saw on the news like Nicaragua was allowing like Russian assets to dock there, planes, boats, things like that, to use their country as a harbor. A lot of South American countries are fairly favorable to Russia. I mean, we still have the embargo with Cuba, last I heard, and so we're still in not super favorable relations with Cuba. Like, you've got African countries, which China has been helping out a lot through loans or just like free infrastructure building that might call favors for China. And so basically if it ends up being like large chunks of like Africa, South America, the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is just brushing Biden off. They're looking
India.
at an axis of Iran and China. Like if this huge swath of the world all at once just says screw NATO. Like that's the thing. Like World War One and Two was a lot of it was Europe at war with itself, and like in World War Two, Japan kind of got involved too. But this is going to be an instance where you're going to have Europe at war with itself, at least in the case of like Russia. Uh, Turkey doesn't seem to be too fond of the EU recently as a NATO ally, but they're on thin ice right now. Like Turkey's like really stirring the pot. Um, some Eastern European countries aren't happy with NATO, like Hungary and stuff like that. So like if Europe gets embroiled in its own like struggles and the rest of the world says NATO's weak, let's go for it, boys. Like this is going to be a world war, unlike I think anything we've seen in the last two.
Yeah, exactly. Just we got a question here from Craig Mitchell. How do you think Erdogan and Turkey will play this? Well, we know how Erdogan's playing it. He gave Ukraine those Bakhtar drones. He's really trying to support Ukraine in all this. Um, we'll see if he backs down. If it turns out that Russia wins and it turns out that was a bad choice, well, maybe he'll back down. But Erdogan is kind of a wild card because on the one hand, remember over Syria, he shot down Turkey shot down that Russian plane like 6 years ago. That was a minor diplomatic crisis. So they're definitely willing to play brinksmanship with the Russians, and I think at this point, still the only country that Turkey dislikes more than Russia is probably Greece, which is a fellow NATO member nation. So I don't know if they'll do anything against Greece yet.
It's just interesting how to see like old rivalries from like the Middle Ages coming back, right? Because when we're describing Turkey, Greece, Russia, I'm thinking about Constantinople. I'm thinking about like all that old stuff going on like way back when. And it seems like those are still the axes. And so it's interesting to think about, right? Because Turkey does not like Russia. I think Turkey and Russia kind of have like a rivalry. They yeah, but at the same time, I don't think Turkey likes the Western European nations all that much either. Like they'll use them in an alliance, but I don't think they're overly fond of them. Like, you can talk about Turkey shooting down the Russians, but at the same time, Turkey also threatened to flood Europe with with migrants after the stuff that went on in Syria. It's like, yeah, they are definitely not super friendly with the EU from what it looks like to me. They're always trying to get stuff out of them more so than being like a yes man ally to them. And so if push really came to shove, I wonder where Turkey would fall on that, because on the one hand, it seems like Russia, China, Iran, maybe Saudi Arabia want an alliance. And I could see Turkey, it seems to be fairly secular of the countries around that area. I don't think it's like super Islamic. I could be wrong. Um, I don't think like it would necessarily be pulled into that alliance just because of its proximity to those other countries. At the same time, I don't think it would want to join that alliance if Russia's in there either. But at the same time, if the EU keeps antagonizing Turkey, or they keep antagonizing each other, or whatever's going on there, whatever dysfunction's there, just doesn't stop. Uh, I mean, what's Turkey gonna do? Be a wild card trying to fight everybody? How's that gonna turn out?
Yeah, I don't think it'll turn out well. The again, I think the really interesting point here is the Western media is now being forced to admit that Ukraine is losing. Now, the thing that is going to throw a lot of people for a loop is the completely dishonest way in which this war was reported. The reporting from the Western media was that Russia wanted to annex the whole country, which is not what Russia said officially. And so anything short of complete annexation can be spun by the West as a victory of the West because Russia, in some sense, fell short from its goals. But that was never Russia's goals. I think at most Russia wanted all the territory east of the Dnieper, but more narrowly the Donbass region and the Black Sea coastal region. And so what's when that expectation of Ukrainian victory. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Maybe nobody will remember. Nobody seems to remember that we lost Kabul and the Taliban and $80 billion worth of equipment. Maybe nobody remembers at this point.
Yeah, yeah, Todd. The next current thing is going to tell us all about what to get mad about next, right? I still hear murmurings about monkeypox like every other day, it seems. Uh, yeah, monkeypox. I mean, then you've got all the other domestic stuff going on here. I mean, domestic stuff's really escalating domestically here. I mean, the Ukraine war could get even hotter and hotter and hotter, but if the news keeps going the way it's going here, I don't even think there'd be room for it in the news cycle anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So, speaking of domestic affairs in the news cycle, there was the attempted assassination of Brett Kavanaugh by one Nicholas John Roski, a 26-year-old from Simi Valley, California. So yeah, this is definitely escalating a lot. So now we're having people that are directly threatening to assassinate Supreme Court justices, which is frankly insane. I mean, this is frankly it's never happened before in the history of the United States that these disputes would be taken to the actually threatening Supreme Court justices with murder, which I think does show you how fragile the U.S. position is right now domestically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could say that there's a continuous chain of escalation, because way back when Steve Scalise got shot at the congressional baseball game, right? Like, it does seem to be there's a lot of rhetoric uh that's okay with. I mean, I'm seeing posts on Twitter about this as well. I saw a post on Twitter the other day. He deleted it to his credit eventually, but the post was just like, hey, for people that are old, sick, dying, don't have much time left on earth, you could really do us all a favor by taking out one of these justices. Think about it. Wink, wink. Basically, was the gist of the tweet. Um, and yeah, people just really that's how far we've gone. Like, basically, the entire point is like any quote non-democratic system needs to go in order for the people to get their way. Never mind the reasons why those systems exist in the first place or anything like that. It's just it's getting in the way of what enough people want, so we're just gonna bulldoze it over. And that just seems to be where we're headed. I mean, it could be the Supreme Court, it could be talk of abolishing the Electoral College, it could be talk of just like uh packing the court to get rid of the Second Amendment or whatever you want. The idea is the usual institutions of government and compromise are basically done.
Yeah, they're gone. If this man is convicted, he could get 20 years in prison, and his hearings will begin in the on the 22nd of this month. Yeah, I mean that'll be an interesting case to watch to see how the ruling goes. Because if he's let off, how will the Republican right, conservative right react to this? It's like they'll be like, well, you know what they're going to say. They're going to say, well, what if a right wing guy tried to shoot, say, you know, one of the Democratic appointees? They'd say, well, it would be all over the news, and everybody would be upset about it. There'd be all this protection. You know, that's not fair. Well, I mean, at this point, we should be used to the fact that the Democrats don't play fair. So of course that's whatever. That's just how it goes. But yeah, I mean when you're actually threatening, government agents in this bold way, because you could say that I don't remember her name, but there was that female Republican who was shot and killed like 10 years ago in Arizona by a shooter. Um, but that was just kind of a lone wolf crazy guy, not a part of a broader movement. Whereas this attempted shooter, was a part of this broader reaction to the leak of Alito's opinion on Roe versus Wade and that it should be repealed. And of course, we're getting up to that vote in either late June, early July. So, but we see that this is a part of a broader movement, though, to say that hey, look, once enough people reach this point, we can say we can expect that some of them will be violent and try to shoot somebody.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a word for this. I'm trying to put my finger on it. Oh yeah, I think it's called stochastic terrorism, right? Like this isn't even the right's term. The left understands this very, very well. I mean, we could appeal to James Lindsay's iron law of woke projection here, right? The left's always talking about stochastic terrorism and how people who say mean things about, I don't know, LGBTQ people or whatever, um, can inspire random people to do violence against them. It's why you got to cancel Dave Chappelle or something. But you have guys going on Twitter and saying full blast, yeah, kill Supreme Court justices or whatever. Oh no, mum's the word on that one. It's like, yeah, well, we all know that there are no bad tactics, only bad targets. Basically, is what it's boiling down to. But I think what's going to be really interesting here is if they succeed, like what do they think is going to happen? It's just like, okay, we stop big bad Brett Kavanaugh or something, and now Biden gets to try to ram through another justice, and we'll squash the filibuster. We'll make sure it happens. Do you think what do you think the right's going to do about that? Right, what the right's basically going to do is some absolutely crazy guy on the right's going to go tit for tat and try to kill a left justice.
Well, and by the way, we know that'll happen because the Oklahoma City bombing by Timothy McVeigh was a response to what the federal government did on Ruby Ridge.
Oh, that's a part I didn't know. That's actually really interesting. But yeah. So honestly, here's where I think the left's end game is in all this, right? Uh, tell me what you think about this conspiracy theory I've been thinking of today. I think they want somebody to kill Kavanaugh so they can finally get the people on the right to agree with legislation on guns because one of their own got shot.
Ooh, yeah, I could see that. I don't know how effective it would be, but yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, like I saw some really wild takes on Twitter today, right? Uh, Basically all the people on the left are saying, "Oh, hey, if people are going after Kavanaugh, it's the guns that are the problem. Let's just ban the guns." And so it's just like no matter what seems to happen politically, the left's answer is let's always ban the guns. It's like there are a whole crowd of people outside of Kavanaugh's house, almost all hours of the day, probably. It doesn't take a gun. Molotov cocktail will do it. There's all sorts of things that'll do it. Like if they think going after the guns, but as soon as I just saw this talking point just like come out of nowhere, and I saw like everybody like drones saying the same thing in several Twitter threads. I'm like, okay, this was pushed from somewhere, and wherever's pushing this might be attempting to be prophetic here. So I'm kind of worried about it.
Yeah, it's probably some sort of media matters plant. I even speaking of what you said about the outrage mob, it reminded me of even Caleb Moppin get on this. Yeah, he retweeted this two frame meme where somebody says, what are you mad at? And then there's this woman with like, a normie face looking at the phone saying, I haven't been told yet.
Yeah. Oh, I love that meme so much.
It's it's great. But now this is also, well, okay, since we have this attempted assassination of Brett Kavanaugh tied into guns, you said that there were also some Second Amendment hearings going on in the Senate.
Yeah, I think there was a Second Amendment bill in the House. I believe it passed. I mean, who's shocked by that? It's probably going to go to the Senate. And that was really interesting. Is watching some clips of some of the speeches on the Democrat side for the hearing, and some of them were just coming out and flagrantly saying basically "f your Second Amendment rights," "f your constitutional rights." We're gonna do whatever it takes to pass this. We're gonna squash the filibuster. We're gonna pack the courts. You can't stop us. It was just vindictive sounding. It's like there's nothing you can do about it. You can't stop us. And it's just like wow, that's insane. Like I don't know what these people are thinking, except maybe if I was to be a little conspiratorial, they're afraid of their midterm chances. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to force a political escalation before the midterms happen so that either the dynamics of the election change because they can provoke the right into doing something, or um, they can basically solidify enough power with the time they've got left, such that it just doesn't matter. The right's just not going to win elections. Outside of that, I don't understand what they think they hope to gain by just like being so brazen about this.
Well, I think part of it is a lot of these agitators don't really know what the stakes are, and they're just sort of being whipped up into a frenzy. I also have to wonder how intelligent these agitators are. A lot of them might actually be low IQ, and so they're because okay, shooting. Since we're talking about guns, there was the Buffalo shooter and there was the guy in Texas.
Right.
And what was interesting is that both of them were on Discord talking to the same guy, almost like there was a glowy, grooming both of them to shoot up schools. Now, isn't that convenient? That
A
you know,
glowy. I just love that word. I just learned that word very, very recently, in fact. And ever since I heard it, I just can't stop getting a chuckle out of it. Makes me think of Terry A. Davis. Sorry, go ahead.
no. But like the point is, why there are always with a lot of these shootings, there are these strange connections that these people have. Which is like, well, wait a minute, how did he know that guy? How is this guy involved? Which does seem to be that a lot of this could be grooming, and so they're grooming these people to be shooters. These people have psychological issues, other issues, and so really, but we know that the government does this all the time in a whole host of other ways. Well, the government will create a problem that when manifested, falls into a predicted category of what they want as this terrible thing that we need to fix, which wouldn't have happened had they not set it up to happen. But because we have to fix it, they can then ram through something they want. In this case, rolling back the Second Amendment.
Yeah, it's like that meme. I keep seeing this meme where they there's just like a New York Times article or Time article or some paper magazine had an article with just like a compilation of like articles about like the shooter using an AR-15 or something like that. And some genius took that same formatting. Instead of saying the shooter used an AR-15, they instead said the shooter was known by the FBI. And all the articles and dates just put that all on like a single mashed page, and I'm just like, that's hilarious.
It's gorgeous, beautiful. Because I noticed on Twitter that some of the people I was following, there was a lot of Second Amendment stuff that just kind of blew up earlier in the week, and of course it was a result of these shootings. And what is just so ridiculous is the sort of lack of historical understanding that the American people have. Because when you have the take the guns crowd, they always say, well, okay, it wasn't meant to be like military grade weapons, right? So let's go ahead and read the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, so what did that mean in the 18th century, in the early 19th century? Well, this is where a lack of historical knowledge and the fact that our schools are crap is really bad, because it used to be that every American knew what a privateer was. There were
Yeah.
privateers in the American Revolution. There were privateers in the War of 1812. Heck, there were privateers in the American Civil War by both sides, and which by that point they were called commerce raiders. The point being, though, private, in this case, companies, but private individuals had cannons on ships. So uh, that was completely compatible with the the U.S. Constitution, and that was what was expected. Because even in 1812, Madison was president. He helped create the Constitution. He was a co-author on the Federalist Papers. So if we look at like the first generation of U.S. political leadership, which are the founding fathers themselves, they're okay with this. They're okay with private individuals having cannons. Case closed. This should be obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them try to point to the Federalist side of the constitutional debate that said like we think that the state should hold all the arms and just be responsible for arming the militias if they need them or something, and the federal government's gonna arm states who then arm militias and whatever. Like the Federalist position was kind of meh, but it's like yeah, you can cite what the Federalists wanted in the debate up to the Constitution all you want, but what matters is the compromise that actually happened. And what seems to have been the reading from it is, after the Constitution was written, there have been several quotes that said, "Don't worry, the government cannot, take your arms." Basically, is the point of this. Um, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, the Anti Federalists only went along with the Constitution because of the amendments, which were added in order to assuage many of their concerns.
Right.
That's otherwise, someone like Patrick Henry wouldn't have signed it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I just get really really annoyed with this argument. Like, well, what are you gonna do to stop tyranny? The government's got drones and tanks and blah 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 blah, and you just got your little AR-15. Like on the one hand, here's what really bugs me about this. Right. Here's what bugs me about this. An AR-15 seems to be a Schrodinger type weapon, and here's what I mean by that. Right. It's a terrible weapon of war when the left wants to regulate it, but it's like this dinky little pea shooter that couldn't hold a candle to anything the military has when they want to explain how it wouldn't help you oppose tyranny. So which is it? Is it a weapon that can go toe to toe with our military's weapons of war, or is it a little dinky pea shooter that's ineffective in the face of true weapons of war? Because that rhetoric doesn't work both ways.
Yeah, and of course, this is classic, Clinton News Network. There's no way to fix the Second Amendment. Let's just get rid of it. I mean that really just sums it all up. June 9th.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that just says it all. And the other thing is, yeah, the other thing is the opponents of the Second Amendment clearly don't know what guns are. There's no such thing as an assault weapon. It's literally a made up, dumbass normie term that doesn't mean anything. There's assault rifles, but there's no such thing as an assault weapon. And the AR-15 is a select fire weapon, not fully automatic. So it's like these people have no idea what they're talking about.
I mean,
And
does civilian AR-15 even have selective fire? I mean,
oh,
the
that's
the
semi-automatic. Yeah.
yeah, semi-automatic. Yeah, I think the biggest difference between it's not necessarily automatic. It's just select or burst fire, basically. Like think Halo 2, the battle rifle. How you pull the trigger and like a few shots come out at the same time. Um, and yeah, I've never seen any AR-15s. I know several people that own guns, even some that own AR-15s. I've never seen any with select fire capabilities, and that's one of the biggest differences. Another bizarre thing too is, I see a bunch of news articles talking about how AR-15s shoot like the bullets from AR-15s are specially designed to be lethal, and they leave like these terrible wounds and blah 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 blah. Right? Rifles are bad, guns are better, and then you see like handguns are better. And then Joe Biden comes out, and he's just like, yeah, 9 millimeter rounds are the problem. They can blow people's lungs out or whatever. And it's like, hold on, wait a minute, what? like, um, I don't know about you, but when I think of just like modest self defense rounds, the 9 millimeter is what comes to mind. If you want to blow somebody's lung out, you want like a Magnum, you want like maybe a 45. I'm not thinking 9 millimeter. But the other thing too is they'll say that like the rifle rounds for the AR are too small and they bounce around on people's insides. Well, if you go too small compared to a 9 millimeter, that's probably more risk of happening. Like I don't know. The whole discussion's so confused.
Well, yeah, it is. And if you look at Great Britain, where they did effectively ban guns, what do you know? Knife homicides went through the roof. Like, almost like the weapon of choice isn't really the issue here. Almost.
Well, yeah, I mean, I see their argument that like you're just not going to kill as many people as efficiently with a knife as you will a gun. I mean, I get that, right? So if somebody wants to go on a mass stabbing, you might see like 3 or 4 people stabbed before like 5 people just bum rush the guy and tackle him to the ground or something. It's usually how these things go. And of those 3 or 4 people stabbed, maybe two die and a couple have some injuries. Maybe they recover in a month. Um, whereas in a shooting, you could take out like 6 to 8 people before you can restrain the shooter if he just opens fire in a crowded room or something. And so I get the argument that um, guns are just so quick and efficient at just taking lives very very quickly compared to knives and other utensils and things like that. Um, my issue is trust. Like, okay, I don't think it should be too much for the right to admit that guns just are more efficient than other tools at killing people. I mean, unless you're like driving through a parade or something. Um, but I think the issue is trust. If the right wing argument is we don't care about this because we're worried about government tyranny, I think what the left should want to do is say, okay, well, we want to assuage your fears about government tyranny so that you just don't think you need them anymore to protect yourself against government tyranny. But the left are trying to act, or the Democrats, because a lot of left people don't associate with Democrats. I mean, I don't think Caleb Maupin associates himself with a Democrat, right? Um, like a lot of the Democrats seem to be trying to be as tyrannical as possible. Like we're fresh off the vaccine lockdowns. They would have mandated the vaccine for everybody if they could have. Um, I hear they're trying to digitize the currency. The way they're talking about repealing the Second Amendment, F your constitutional rights. Um, all the social concerns that people have about schools and other things. What was that I heard a while ago about like the Department of Homeland Security or the FBI or somebody like investigating parents and school boards and things like this. Like the government does have an image problem, and it seems like more middle ground could be reached if that's what people really wanted to do. If we started by fixing the image problem the government seems to have.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also important to remember that with Buffalo shooter in New York, the NRA ranks New York very low as a state for Second Amendment rights. So it's happening in an area which has very restrictive gun laws, and and we know that the reasoning of the left is just BS on this because Mexico has some of the strictest gun laws in the world, and yet they're being blown away by cartel violence. It literally doesn't do anything. It's like you're just letting the cartels take over your country because you're not allowing law-abiding Mexicans to own guns. Same would go with like the narcos in Colombia, with like the FARC and the narcos. So it doesn't work. And for example, like you don't have a shooting at an NRA rally, or like the Tea Party rally, because everybody's packing, right? You don't have a shooting there. You have a shooting it where there are people that aren't armed, like a school.
Yeah, it's not like 94% of mass shootings are in gun-free zones or something like that. And yeah, but the other countries, right? That's another aspect of the debate that's always interested me because what the left will say is like, well, you have these gun, heavily regulated places like Chicago, but Chicago is next to Michigan or Missouri, or I think it's Missouri. And Missouri's got really, really, lax gun regulations, and so people bring guns from Missouri into Chicago. Um, and the left wants to say something like, well, we bring a bunch of guns into South America and Mexico as part of like the CIA-backed drug trade or something like that, and so Mexico's gun laws would be just fine if we weren't mass producing guns and we weren't bringing guns in and so on and so forth. But okay, maybe in a perfect world, it sounds like the genie's already in the bottle. It sounds like we've already like sent so many guns around the world because we've been mass producing them. Like the US is a mass manufacturer of guns all around the world in quantities we sell to other countries like Saudi Arabia, in countries that are secretly, uh, traded around the world in clandestine operations and so on. Like, I mean, it seems like there's so many guns out there right now that unless you live on an island like Australia, um, you're in trouble. Like France. France is often used as an example of like good gun regulation. But I remember two instances, right? There was one where there was like a shooting at a church in like I want to say 2014, 2015, and they did an investigation on that, and they investigated a bunch of mosques, and they found like just massive stashes of weapons, like AK-47s, like AK-47s, right? Your average anti-gun person probably doesn't seem to appreciate the difference between an AR-15 and an AK-47, but wow, like they're finding some really heavy duty weapons, just all over the place in France that had strict gun regulations because they were snuck in so well. And then recently, I heard there was an attempt by a far right group in France to assassinate a politician of some kind, I think. But they got tipped off. They investigated. They found like another super secret stash of weapons there. Um, so you can get weapons in. It takes a while. It takes a lot of planning and it takes a bunch of, other resources, but even countries with very, very strict gun laws can have them smuggled in. And that's with like Europe, where you have like lots of zone crossings. Um, the whole EU system just built around this, whereas the US seems to have a more permissive interstate system. And then we're also landlocked with countries like Mexico and the other South American countries where we have this massive gun problem, admittedly, in part by our own making. Let's just go with that, right? Like, but can you put the genie back in the bottle?
Yeah, and even if you could, like with Australia's like 15-year gun buyback program, the way they handled COVID shows that you probably don't want to do that.
Oh man, I've been seeing fights about that on Twitter all over the place. Australians being like, "Oh no, it's not that bad. It's been overblown," and blah 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 blah. And other Australians being like, "What are you talking about? I live here. It was miserable. You terrible person." Um, yeah, don't even get me started on Australia. But the other thing that's a real interesting thing to think about is 3D printing technology and ghost guns. I mean, if we don't have it already, we're on the cusp of the printing press for guns and ammunition. And regulating speech is one thing when you have to handwrite stuff by parchment and you can kind of know who's literate in your society and who you can investigate and so on. But once you have a printing press and you have printing presses all over the place, it gets really, really, really hard to regulate uh, literature and stuff like that. I mean, can you? Sure. I mean, we had Comstock laws, for example, and things like that, but it gets really, really hard. And so once that genie is fully out of the bottle with guns, this legislation is just going to be too little, too late. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to regulate things like 3D printing, which I mean, could you imagine? I mean, think about it, right? So here's something I was thinking about a couple of days ago. I just got a good chuckle out of this, right? One of the societies the leftists like really love is Star Trek. But what does Star Trek: The Next Generation and beyond have? It's like replicators. Well, we got to be careful, guys. We have to overregulate them replicators because you never know if somebody can replicate themselves in AK-47 and go to 10 on the Enterprise. Like what? I think this is where the left doesn't fully appreciate the right's point. Once you get this utopian society of the end of scarcity, maximum technology, and everything, if you get the Star Trek society, you can replicate anything your heart desires, right? And so trying to regulate the physical guns in stock doesn't matter. If you can push a couple of buttons and out pops an AK-47, what are you gonna do? Um, and so this is where the left is gonna have to acknowledge the points that the right makes and say that like you have to target the behaviors that make people want to use guns in the first place. Because as technology gets better and guns only become more accessible, the only element you'll be able to control is the human one. And that sounds pretty totalitarian, but I guess I just mean it in the strict sense of just like knowing your neighbor and making sure they're okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, the idea of well, you see, with 3D printing of guns, if we get to that point, and then their ammunition, the way guns are tracked is by serial numbers, but it'll just be impossible to track these. I think they're called ghost guns, the guns that you can
Yeah.
produce that way. They'll be impossible to track. I mean, it'll be over. It'll just be over. You know, yeah. And of course, the issue is, see, this is what's weird, right? This is what the left, the Democrat liberal left, has been saying for decades on all sorts of social issues. We need to deal with the underlying social causes that lead to these pathologies. Well, okay, how about instead of banning guns, we deal with the underlying social causes that lead to the pathologies of people shooting up schools?
Yeah. I don't know
I
what
mean,
to say, but yeah.
simple as. Now, the back to Kavanaugh, because Kavanaugh sort of like covers two issues here. One is the gun issue, but the other is the abortion issue. Because the reason why Kavanaugh is being targeted is because of the leak of the opinion on the Supreme Court of abortion. Now, obviously, this is clearly an intimidation campaign to make sure that people vote the right way. Now, again, this is kind of unprecedented that private civilians would threaten Supreme Court justices to vote a certain way. But we're not talking about just rallies and protests in a city. We're talking about mobs outside of their house with people threatening to kill them. That's that's another level entirely. And what's interesting is if you look at the newspaper articles that are wringing their hands about the possible repeal of Roe versus Wade, and this is actually a key piece here. It's all about economics. Forbes had an article that came out recently that said female participation will go down in the workplace if we repeal Roe v. Wade. Yeah, and of course the goal of capitalism is the race to the bottom, the race to the lowest labor costs, and one way to lower labor costs is to increase workforce participation. So really, the real justification for the elites for keeping Roe versus Wade on the books is to facilitate the race to the bottom, which creates this broader economic catastrophe that we're living with.
Yeah, I saw an article from somebody on Twitter. It might have been secular pro life. It might have been somebody else. Um, the I haven't got to read the article yet, but the title of it was it was written by a black person. It said once 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 they get rid of abortions, they'll no longer have an excuse to help us. And from what I got, the gist of the article was something like abortion is being used as a form of like intermediate uh, safety net politics, in the sense that, like, I don't know, for black women, um, the idea, it's basically bootstraps theory for Democrats, right? It's just like you'll have no excuse for your life holding you down, because if you feel like you're settled with a child, get rid of it, join the labor force, and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Basically, seems to be like the neoliberal, at least the left neoliberal, um, position on this issue. But if that becomes untenable, the hope seems to be for, like, I'd say the segment of like left pro-life people that I've been seeing on Twitter, which is kind of fascinating to watch. Um, the hope seems to be that there'll be some broader systemic reform that can actually be, you know, sought after to really help these communities out, whether it's infrastructure, investment, um, things like that, instead of just like throwing people into the labor grind. Another interesting thing to think about with this topic is the inflation that's already going on. We're already seeing the great resignation. We saw it during COVID to some degree. In some sectors, we're still in it. From what I hear from higher level tech sectors and stuff, it's still commonplace for people to like jump from firm to firm to firm, looking for higher and higher and higher raises, making like this perpetual like musical chairs. And so if this abortion thing happens on top of that, I don't think it'll affect the higher sectors too much because a lot of them are in like Silicon Valley, California, places that'll probably protect abortion. Um, but certainly in other sectors we could see this, and things could start getting even worse as far as like wages go. Um, what's interesting about that is would the wages finally start increasing faster than other costs of living like housing? Because that's what's been really getting people is the cost of living for housing has been ballooning so much that it's almost like just two incomes are assumed just to kind of like make it work. I don't know. There's like a whole bunch tangled in there.
Right. But I found the Forbes article, and this just kind of says it all. When a larger number of the population are employed, their paychecks mean more money to spend on food, clothing, entertainment, and goods, that in turn increase demand and helps fuel the GDP. Yeah, but what they don't tell you is it's cut wages in half. So it literally negates everything they just said there. It's clear that parental status has an impact on women's labor force participation. For example, the fact that women continue to shoulder the majority of caregiving duties may be a contributing factor, prompting 43% of highly qualified working mothers to leave their careers at some point, according to Harvard Business Review. The financial implications are big. Women lose an average of 18% of their earning power when they take an off ramp, and 37% of their earning power when they spend 3 or more years out of the workforce. This is also research shows the specific impact of abortion access for women in the workforce. The amicus brief filed by The Economist found abortions had a bigger impact on women's labor force participation than birth control, leading to increased wages, especially for Black women. Women who were unable to get an abortion were 3 times more likely to be unemployed after 6 months as compared with women who were able to get an abortion, according to the American Journal of Public Health. For those who are denied abortions, you see an immediate drop in full time employment. Yes, public assistance goes up, but it's not enough to mitigate the loss of employment income because public assistance isn't enough to support a family, says Dr. Foster. Some people, yeah, well, that's the question. Why is nothing apparently enough to support a family? The broader inflationary issue isn't being dealt with here, which is itself being fed by putting women in the workforce, which depresses wages as a part of the race to the bottom. I mean, this is such double speak crap.
Well, scroll up a second. So there's something else I saw as well that was interesting to me. Oops, there it is. Yeah, check this out. This is insane. Women lose an average of 18% of their earning power when they take an off ramp, and 37% of their earning power when they spend 3 or more years out of the workforce. Okay, that's nuts. I want to see the statistics on that because, like, let's suppose you work from 20. I mean, some people work at 18, but some go to college. But like, let's suppose you work from like 20 years old or 21 years old to like 65 or something. And so you're working for about say 45 years, roughly. Um, if you miss 3 years of work, that's 1/15th. And you're telling me that 37% of their total earning power, over a third, is gone just by taking a few years out of the workforce, right? If you want to know what's wrong with society in a single sentence, it's that sentence. This is how much of a meat grinder the current job market is for people. Is it any wonder that people feeling like depressed, suicidal, just mentally unstable? Like if heaven forbid you have to get treated for cancer or something bad happens to you and you're bedridden for a year or something. Not only do you lose like a year of earnings, but from what they're presenting here, you are getting set back in your future earnings because other people can jump ahead of you in the rat race. And so your total future earning could drop by like 15%. You earn like 15% less money over the course of your life or something stupid just because you sat out of the workforce for a year, maybe even due to unavoidable circumstances. Um, I mean, I know a guy that used to teach, and when he went to work for a tech job after he quit teaching and got his bachelor's in computer science, when he put his teaching credentials on his resume, his offers were lower money than if he just omitted it entirely, because it was better for him to look like somebody out of school with like a bunch of extra math and hobbyist experience and stuff than it would be for him to look like a teacher who just like didn't work in tech for a bunch of time. Like that was bizarre to me. So like all the incentives of our labor structure, abortion, no abortion, and so on, are so absolutely insane that this can happen. Now, I mean, to your point, the reason that corporations can get away with doing this and can get away with treating like every job spot like it's some competitive like Olympic race or something is because there are so many workers fishing for so few job spots, and arguably fewer if automation keeps increasing. And so you have to look at a lot of things. You have to look at immigration. You have to look at number of men and women in the workforce. You have to look at like all sorts of other things. And I mean, you can argue about the inherent quote fairness of like, um, you know, women being out of the workforce because they're the child, they have the children and whatnot. And I get that. There might be to a certain political persuasion and unfairness in nature about that situation that you might want to rectify. But even if we paper over that and everything's working as intended, things working as intended is pretty freaking horrible.
Yeah. And again, the issue that was undergirding that whole discussion was inflation, the thing that they weren't talking about. And of course, the reason why wages aren't keeping up is wages are going down due to the race to the bottom. I mean, I remember in the Audis and in the late 90s, the race to the bottom was everywhere. Everybody knew what that was. And apparently now we all have collective amnesia and have forgotten what the race to the bottom is. And that's the problem. And so, of course, the real reasoning for abortion as legal is in order to ensure that you have a depressed labor force, and they're basically admitting it now. Because if women's workforce participation goes down, then the labor force is going to be significantly less depressed. Um, and that's what the conservatives never understood. And now, granted, maybe it gets repealed, so maybe they finally get their win. But for so long, the reason why they were stonewalled on this issue is it would crash the economy. If we got rid of the birth control pill and abortion and all of these privileges that women are given legally, the economy would collapse because they wouldn't be able to engage in economic activity in the way that our modern economy needs it. And so this is kind of interesting, right? Because when you actually look at this as an economic problem, you realize on the one hand that the conservatives didn't understand the nature of the problem, and that's why it took so long to get to this point. And also, you understand that the socialists didn't understand the problem because they were constantly shooting themselves in the foot by advocating that women continue to participate in the economy to the degree that it is now. Now, of course, what the socialists would say is, well, we want to have women employed in the workforce under socialism. Well, okay, but that's beside the point because you're dealing with material conditions as they are now. And material conditions as they are now, if you put women in the workforce to this degree, you're going to suppress it and you're going to make it easier for the capitalists to stay in charge. So really neither side was looking at this issue clearly.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. I mean, the right has been co-opted by quasi-libertarians for a long time. And so all you have to do to convince some normie of something, it seems like, is just say it's good for GDP. It's like, okay, it's good for GDP. I'll allow it. Um, the socialists, though, I don't think the socialists inherently care about GDP and the economy in the same way. I think their number one issue is just abolishing hierarchy and abolishing social coercion in that degree. Um, and so they wouldn't like. I mean, even if the economy was better with deregulated abortion, I think they just have an in principle objection to social pressures and forces keeping women, I don't know, in the lane of like having kids and tending home if they want to do other things, because the socialist movement seems to be about like social empowerment compared to other things. And there could be a subtle difference between like socialism and communism as well. So like maybe a communist would care about like full employment and things like that. But socialists, from my experience, compared to communists, tend to care more about like social issues and maximal like liberty.
Yeah, but the point being though is you can't living under the material conditions of capitalism. You can't act like socialism is already in effect.
Oh yeah,
And
that's
that's
a
exactly what
massive
they.
problem with the left. Yeah, even neoliberals, everybody I talk to has this problem, right? My bugbear, of course, is immigration, right? Because one of the things that the left always complains about, which I agree with completely, is the rent's too high. It's like, of course, it's way high, right? And then it's just like, okay, let's have a conversation about that, right? So when you look at like cities like Seattle or other cities, you just like look at their rent occupancy, and they have like 97 99% occupancy for like 3 years in a row or something. Maybe there's some years like 93%, but it's always like really high. And it's just like, well, guys, in order to get rents down, you're going to have occupancy rates at like 72, 75, somewhere around there, so that like renters are competing with each other for tenants. Because if there's no competition for tenants, there's no economic drive to bring prices down. If you have the expectation that you're going to like fill a unit almost no matter what the price is, so long as some paycheck could reasonably afford it, then you're going to be fine. And they'll raise their rents, see the occupancy rates. Oh, they're still good. Raise them again. They're still good. Raise them again. They'll keep going. And this is how the market finds equilibrium, right? I mean, I can't believe we're having to go to Econ 101, but like when you have a whole bunch of people wanting a good and you're not being authoritarian about it, how are you going to figure out who gets the good? Well, okay, who would buy this for $1? Everybody raises their hand. Who would buy this for $10? Four people don't raise their hand. Everybody else does. Okay. Who would buy this for like $25? Five hands go up, right? Well, I got three of them to sell. Okay. Who would buy this for $35? Three hands go up. Here you go. Here you go. Here you go. There's the three I wanted to sell. I found a price point that I could sell it to three people. That's how rent works. That's how that's how all this works. And so what you need to do is you have to lower the amount of people with hands raised, so to speak, when trying to figure out like how to rent these units out. And until you can do that, rent is just up. It's got nowhere else to go because they're going to keep fishing for higher prices to see if they can, uh, comfortably sell the limited units at a time that they have to sell. And so what do you have to do to resolve that? Well, immigration. It's like, okay, what else can you do to solve it? Like rent control. Well, interestingly, rent control would have another effect on immigration, right? Because then renters would be economically disincentivized from building more units because you can't treat them like speculative investment instruments, right? Stock go up, we buy more stocks. Rent go up, we build more units to get more rents, and so on. So if you flatten it with rent control, that's not going to happen, which will have an indirect effect on immigration because there's just less units that will be built for people. But okay, that aside, let's suppose like okay, we'll both agree rent control. We need rent control. Well, do we have rent control? No. Well, we're going to vote for it. We're going to get it later. It's like, well, okay, but this immigration policy you have now is hurting your rents now. It's making life for you. It's making life hard for you now. Why are you doing this to yourself now? Well, because it's the right thing to do, right? We gotta be maximally like tolerant and maximally inclusive and blah 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 blah. And well, eventually we'll get that rent control and it's gonna be great. It's just like, well, okay, why don't you at least wait till after you get the rent control and then be maximally like inclusive or tolerant? Like, why? I don't understand. Why are you sticking it to the? Why are you helping the tenants and sticking it to yourselves to like prioritize these things in the orders you seem to be prioritizing doing these things? Like, it's just baffling to me. You can go issue by issue on how the left more than most people seem to be like this. I don't understand it.
Yeah. Now, the other issue in the news is Sussman gets acquitted because the jury's a bunch of Clinton buddies. So I know you've been following that a little more than I have. So why don't you unpack that logo?
I've been following this one too much. I just heard about it on Twitter and I've heard some chatter about it. But the basic idea is Trump was in office. Um, there's the Mueller investigation, and then there was the guy there's Barr, and then there was the guy that took over investigating. I remembered his name like a few hours ago, and now his name escapes me. Um, he was investigating afterwards, and he found this gigantic conspiracy, basically, uh, where let me see if I can get this right because there's a lot of details here. So you have Clinton's lawyer. Okay, so Clinton pays Fusion GPS, and Clinton's Fusion GPS uses that money, gets Steele, gets the dossier, and Sussman Hillary's lawyer somehow gets that to the FBI. I think I've missed a subtle thing there. It might not have been Sussman directly. Somehow this gets to the FBI and the media. This whole Steele dossier thing. Um, that was the whole P tape accusation of Trump. They peed on a bed and Russian prostitutes, and they have it on tape, and the Russians have something over him. It was really bizarre. BuzzFeed ran with it. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And so it seemed. I mean, from what I heard, this came out in the trial, but I really got to read more just to make sure I'm getting it exactly right. But if the notes I'm seeing on Twitter are credible, um, it seemed that like Hillary had like a direct line to the FBI, either headquartered or just with contacts. Um, her lawyer was brokering stuff to the FBI. That's Sussman, and um, basically, as a result of this investigation, they found this out. They found out this whole thing. It was astroturfed, and there was no real reason to investigate like Trump for the Steele dossier stuff, and so all of it was kind of like fabricated. Now, all that kind of like came out in the trial in the investigation, and Hillary's lawyer was the first of a bunch of people investigated for lying to the FBI because this FBI investigation in part was like the Mueller report and other things. Like there's like a really big deal. Lots of resources were used on this. And if all this was fabricated by a lie, it's a big deal. And then so all this came out during the trial. And that's almost more interesting than just like the base question of whether or not Clinton lied to, or Clinton's lawyer lied to the FBI. That's like ancillary to all the stuff that we were able to find out in the trial just from just from the information. Um, but anyway, and so the jury was just like full of like Clinton donors, Clinton voters, people who like directly knew Sussman. Like it was absolutely insane. And of course, Sussman got acquitted. And so a lot of people on the right are like furious about this because from their perspective, it's just like if all these things that were showed in the trial are true, there's no way you could have rationally concluded this guy did not do this. And what I've been hearing about is that the rumblings I'm hearing is there's just no way you could ever get a fair trial for any of these deep state goons in DC or Virginia or that whole area because everybody's kind of in on it over there. And so, since you're tried by a jury of your peers, there's just no way to get an impartial jury. You're asking these people to convict themselves, and so you can have them dead to rights. It's like the old Trump quote, right? I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and people would still vote for me. Well, this is worse, right? These people could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and since they all have a jury of their peers, none of them would ever convict them for it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's that kind of dynamic that I'm hearing about.
Well, and let's not forget, right? That kind of dynamic is what the left decried in all of its anti-racism. They're like, oh, this poor black man in the South was tried by a jury of white good old boys who was friends with the guy that made the accusation. And it's like, they're like, oh, that's terrible. You can't have that unless it's your guy who's a good old boy. And then, he's going to get let off. And this is also right at the time, right, that they're now arresting members of the former members of the Trump presidency for their involvement in January 6th. So, well, yeah, they're going to get thrown away, but Sussman, it's okay. He's good.
Durham, that's the name of the investigator. Man, I can't believe my mind's going. Yeah, the Durham investigation. But yeah, you're right. You're seeing, let's see, was it Navarro was just like put in cuffs at the airport, arrested for contempt of Congress or something. They're trying to go after Steve Bannon. Uh, Tario, the Proud Boys, is trying to be investigated. They're doing like the January 6th hearings right now. I haven't watched them yet. I mean, it just seems like theater to me. Like it's crazy. I mean, on 5/29, you had the left like burning down Washington D.C. to the point that Trump was escorted to the bunker and the White House was put on lockdown because the protests, the violence were getting like so close to the grounds. And meanwhile, January 6th, it's like, yes, the way the protesters trampled the DC police was terrible. The police should have had more reinforcements. Like there's a whole like cluster F of problems that happened internally with the way the DC police and stuff secured the area, no question, right? But to call this an insurrection when I didn't see a single Molotov cocktail thrown. I didn't see like a whole bunch of people come in with guns and just start like shooting up the police. They weren't trying to make a bum rush to take out as many members of Congress as possible. Nobody was like, "We're the government now." That I saw. Like, I saw videos of the people just like hanging out in the Congress area, and there's just like this like lone cop walking around with a mask, right? I saw the Viking guy. I saw a bunch of people in the Congress area. This lone cop with a mask is just like, "Yo, you guys." You shouldn't like screw with anything or mess with anything. All right. They're just like, yeah, cool. We're good. We'll leave it like we found it. All right, good guys. Cause like this is like the most sacred area. Cool. Yeah, man, we're good. How you doing, man? Oh, I'm pretty good. How you doing? And that was basically like the tone of the whole video. It was so bizarre, you know. Like this cop's just like patrolling, talking on his radio, just like annoyed these like stupid idiot kids are like in the Congress area and annoyed about the lockdown. He seemed like agitated, annoyed, but it's just like, man, this is making my day at work like so obnoxious, kind of annoying. Like, it's not, oh my god, I'm in terrible fear for my life. There's an armed insurrection coming to kill us all, right? That is not that's not the tone you'd get from watching that video. And that's how the Democrats are trying to play it off. And I think people who get exposed to this stuff are just like, yeah, these people are nuts. So I don't know. The whole thing's crazy.
Well, yeah, the whole thing is crazy. And the other thing that has come out is a lot of these. Okay, so a lot of people within the Jan 6 protest were undercover Antifa. Like there were ex Antifa who were saying like, "Oh yeah, I know that guy," and they were trying to lead the rest of everybody to do something exaggerated and extreme by pushing and by blending in with the group.
Right.
And yeah, I mean that's what they were doing. The I guess yeah, the January 6th is really just a hot mess. And after the mostly peaceful protests of 2021, yeah, I mean this is a joke. I mean, half the country can be on fire due to riots, but it's mostly peaceful. So, that's how it goes. And the other thing is we'll see how this goes, but apparently now Kyle Rittenhouse is suing the people that defamed him in his trial, of which he was acquitted. So we'll see how that trial goes.
Oh, I'm so excited to see that because the amount of bad takes I saw on Kyle Rittenhouse's trial were just like amazing. Amazing. I mean, I mean, something I've been thinking about over and over and over again is I can't imagine how different the dynamic would have been if Kyle would have used like a handgun to do what he did instead of an AR-15. So many people on the left just don't want to hear, I mean, the Democratic Party left, the neo-lib left, let's say, don't want to hear like, anything from Kyle's side of the story because he was where he shouldn't have been wielding an AR-15. And that basically sealed his fate in their public opinion. And so it seems like whatever lies said about him are just justified because like he's a bad person or something. And that's just a feeling I get from trying to talk to anybody about this. So I've just kind of given up. Um, but if he can pull a Nick Sandman and go after some of these big media outlets and just like clean them out, that's good. I mean, I hope all these people to fame start doing it. The best thing that could happen is some of these news outlets just declaring bankruptcy in the next like 2 years. I wonder how much good that would do for the country. On the one hand, it'd get out some of these really, really bad actors. On the other hand, power pours a vacuum. And if anything happens, it seems like the media is getting more hyper fragmentized. And so people are increasingly like just hearing different facts about the world and believing they exist in completely different realities. And if that continues, if like CNN and MSNBC or whatever just like go belly up, and they're replaced with like 4 media outlets that are like hyper liberal, hyper conservative, whatever. And that just makes things worse. It's like, well, that sucks.
Yeah, that would suck. Now, and of course, as you said, one of the things that the left does, and of course the federal government does, is lawfare. Well, they even if they know they can't win the case, they'll still sue you in order to ruin you financially. If more people do what Kyle does, then you could sort of put the lawfare boot on the other foot,
Exactly.
and see how that see how them apples, right? Because because it's pretty clear that if you're well connected and you're a Democrat, the law works a different way than it does for everybody else.
Yeah, so it seems to me. I mean, it seemed that way ever since like Clinton's server. I can't imagine a world in which the FBI is just like, "Hi, we're gonna need you to turn in X, because we have good reason to think that X is involved with some criminal activity or something. We have a subpoena for it and everything." And I could just go, "Oh, my lawyer will turn in what part of X we think you need, and I'm just going to destroy the rest. Okay, thanks, bye." I can't imagine my life not being ruined if I pulled something like that.
Well, yeah, and of course, so Navarro was arrested for being in contempt. Isn't that being in contempt?
Well, you'd think. I mean, that's contempt of Congress as well, which is absolutely hilarious. But
Oh, I know. It's yeah. Well, the Clinton empire goes deep. I mean, that's what a lot of people have been saying for years and years. And yeah, it does seem that they just can't get touched. Now, the other thing is, this is what I don't get. A lot of course, no surprise. A lot of the lamestream media are saying that January 6th, with these new hearings, proves that Trump was behind an insurgency. Why isn't Trump been arrested? Right? How can you say that when Trump's not been arrested? Because if he was behind a coup, then you'd arrest him.
that's a good point. I mean, some of that gets a little dicey, right? Because like even Barr, Congress had a whole time holding Barr because some of when Barr did some of what Barr did, he has executive privilege from being a member of the president's cabinet. And there's certain things Congress isn't allowed to compel from people that have these kinds of executive privileges. As far as I've understood this, I might be getting this wrong. Um, and so I can imagine with Trump, that's like, you know, times 10. Um, I know that they have tried to keep Trump from running again. I think they tried to try Trump politically for insurrection, and that they like kept him off the ballot or something. Um, and I don't know if that case is still ongoing or if it's over and they were unsuccessful. I really need to look that up and see what the situation for that was. I know they tried to do it to Marjorie Taylor Greene and they were unsuccessful. They tried to like stop her from running in Georgia because of her ties to the January 6th thing. Um, but that case I don't think was successful, and she can still run and so on. So it seems like that's a really hard thing to prove. Another barrier is, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the history guy, is I don't think anybody has been successfully like prosecuted like under this Espionage Act or whatever since its inception.
1970. Yeah, I don't know who's been convicted under this, so I couldn't say.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely a lot coming down the pike. I'm sure we'll have a lot to say at the end of the month or the beginning of July when we hear about the Supreme Court, one way or the other, on Roe versus Wade. So we've got Roe versus Wade coming down the pipeline. We've got some more Second Amendment stuff coming down the pipeline. We've got Ukraine. We've got January 6 hearings. We've got, I mean, it's just going to start. This is something that you and I have been talking about in private. All of these things are happening all at once.
All at
We,
once.
we, when 5 years ago, when we were talking about these issues, right after Trump got elected, we didn't think they'd all happen at once.
No,
This,
we thought
this,
there'd be a sequence.
yes. And so for us, this is like, wait, they're all of these are happening at once, and they're all accelerating. Like when this just conflagration. Well, while we're on the topic, gas prices all over the country are through the roof. I mean, where I'm at, diesel's around 5.60 and gas is 5. So, I mean, there's that crisis. Now, where you're at, gas is even higher, right, Logos?
I think so. I don't drive. I haven't left my house in like forever, so I haven't been checking on gas prices. I'll have to ask my family what levels they're at in our area next time I talk to them about that.
So, I guess the important thing to bring up here too is what are the implications of this gas hike? Now, the first thing I want to say is I get really frustrated with like normicons and libertarians who say, "Well, it's because Biden blocked the Keystone Pipeline." Well, okay, certainly blocking the Keystone Pipeline didn't help as far as keeping gas prices manageable. But gas prices have been increasing since the OPEC embargo of the 70s. Gas has been getting more expensive in general. It's a trend. Now, yeah, furthermore, we've got global supply chain disruptions. What is that going to do to the price of gas? And so the real issue here is I think that what people don't want to admit is something that's been foreseen a long time by people who talk about peak oil is the idea that we're running out of easily accessible gas reserves. So it's not that we're running out of the gas that's in the ground. We've used up about half of what's been projected to have existed. But what ends up happening is there's this formula called EROEI, energy returns on energy investments. And as the energy returns and approaches energy investment, where they reach parity at one, thermodynamically, there's no way to get the oil out of the ground
Yeah.
because it takes as much or more energy to get it out of the ground than what's in there. So what we really are seeing is a process which is being woefully mismanaged, by the way, of that parity of the formula where the ER equals the EI, which means that we're going to have that'll be the end of the oil age. And what the problem is that they're just going to keep going up. And for example, shale oil that only worked because the Fed kept interest rates at zero. And these same people that believe in limitless supplies of oil are all, a lot of them are Austrians who would object to the government using the Federal Reserve Bank to keep interest rates at zero. So you got a choice here. Either you need the Fed to keep the economy going, or shale oil is not economically viable, and your fantastic claims about it are false. Which is it?
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about shale oil, so I don't know what to do about that. My big worry is the fact that um our country is built and structured in a way that assumes you drive around in cars. The freeway system, the way our cities are structured, they're not built to be walkable. They're built with intersections, they're built with stuff spread out all over heck. You don't have like in Europe, you have cities with like these clusters where you can have like supermarkets and game stores and living areas and stuff, all these little clusters of cities. So you can have like these little neighborhoods where you can walk about and do what you'd want to do locally. And so that's why gas prices have been high in Europe forever. Some of it due to taxes and some of it due to other reasons. They don't what's the word? They don't give their gas companies incentives. That's not the word I'm looking for. They don't invest in them like our company does, or our government does. Our government like pays the cost to keep costs down for us, and so like our tax revenue keeps prices low at the pump, so to speak. Whereas Europe does less of that, I think. But because they're structured in a way their cities are walkable, and so you like bike where you want to go, maybe you take a bus to like some other part of the city or something, and transportation works. It's nice. Um, most people don't drive. It's just not that terrible. Now, what happens here if gas gets so expensive that you can't afford it? We reach Europe levels of gas, and we've done absolutely nothing to fix the way that we're structured. In a lot of areas of the country, you're going to have to like walk 45, 50 minutes to get to the grocery store, to get to where you're trying to go, because we've built things to be so crazy. And so the big part of the gas crisis is to me, it's like, yeah, when it comes to like driving to work and the economy being efficient, that's bad. But let's suppose that what you're talking about of peak oil is right, and we're going to reach a point where we're just not going to drive because it's not energy efficient to do so. Driving is like in case of emergencies, we have a car with a full tank of gas to get us out if a volcano is erupting or something stupid's happening, right? We have to leave now. There's natural disaster. Um, Otherwise, we walk. We just don't have the society built uh, to be walkable. And I think that's going to be the 1-2 punch in all this that like really hits us in the gut.
Oh yeah, yeah, certainly. The other the before I get to that, the other point I wanted to make was the consumption of energy is exceeding way faster than the production of energy.
Right.
So there's what's called Jevons paradox, whereas you have a more efficient process of using energy, the projections are always that people will then consume less because they can do the same thing that they were doing yesterday with less energy. But it turns out that they always increase consumption to that new energy threshold. So we've been doing that for a century now. And the problem is it's rapidly outpacing our ability to get energy with or without, the peak oil, which I think we're getting closer to because, again, gas prices have been going up steadily since 1973. And it's like, okay, if we're getting all of this gas, why isn't the price going down? It's still going up, which and the reason why it's going up is I think peak oil. And so, yeah, we also have cars, being the main means of getting around, whereas in Europe it's rail. Or for long distances, for short distances, you can usually walk around. In fact, there are cities in Europe where there are no car zones. There's like a city in Spain where it's a no car zone, so it's all walkable and usable. And yeah, the American system will be probably the least able to deal with the shocks of an energy crisis where trucks and cars can't operate. I mean, not only that, with the truckers, we've got the projected by 2032, 75% of truckers won't be there anymore in 10 years. Like, yeah, you can't handle that. It's over. The economy just goes belly up. There's no way that we can in 10 years suffer that much loss of truckers and then shift to something else. That's not enough time.
Yeah, definitely. And then if this wasn't enough bad news, we're just going to keep piling it on. Recently, I've been hearing Biden talking about student loans, and it looks like they're set to resume in August. And it looks like what he's done is he looks to be forgiving like $10,000 in student loan debt. And so at the time when rent is going up through the roof, gas is going up through the roof, everything is going up through the roof as far as the economy goes. Um, the point where some people are reporting not even being able to fill up their tanks to drive to work. uh, it's absolutely crazy. Student loans are going to turn on in August, right? And so if the elites weren't very unhappy with the economy before, they're going to probably start being unhappy with the economy again now. I mean, the people that they get the degrees and the college educated people, they're more likely to vote left, except for like the shy Trump voters and stuff. Um, and so then it's not just going to be like a working class problem as far as like high gas prices, because you have all these like people in the city that like take the bus, the train, they live in like these cramped cities, they can do without gas most of the time. you know that'll be the 1-2 punch that hits them too, because things will finally start getting expensive and the loans will start being called, and now things are going to start hurting again, and now they'll start seeing the full brunt of the economy. That it's just, man, everything at once, like we just said, it's all happening at once.
Yeah, everything happening at once. It's well, because here's the deal, right? With regards to the domestic issues in the United States, Russia and China will easily be able to control their populations through authoritarian and totalitarian measures. Well, clearly, the US government and tech companies have been rolling these measures out, but they're not yet in place. And in fact, they're nowhere near as sophisticated as what China and Russia already have. There's no way we can deal with the global threats as well as these internal threats at the same time. There's no way. And China and Russia are making their moves. Iran will likely make its move. And simultaneously, we're not going to withdraw all of our military bases. I mean, that's the one thing that the United States was never going to do, despite, people like Ron Paul trying to, strategically reorient America's resources. So we'll just the U.S. military, industrial, political complex will be spread all over the world and stretched then at home, trying to manage all of these crises. I mean, I just don't see it ending well.
The other issue too is even if they did want to manage everything at home, what are they going to do, right? Because the problem is we've had such high trade deficits for a long time, and national deficits. that like if they have to manage people, like people just drop out of the workforce because they're rioting, they're protesting, they can't afford to put gas in their tank, and they're just like fed up, right? If our economy comes to a halt, our military has been living on borrowed spending. I mean, we allocate a good chunk of it in our domestic budget, sure, but there's like a wink, wink, and a nudge, nudge there that we know that like a lot of our big military spending is going to come from bonds. But the strength of our bonds, the strength of our dollar, the strength of our ability to like import this money into our military and stuff is in some sense backed by the strength of our dollar, in the sense that when we pay our bonds back, it'll mean something. But if we drop out of the economy due to us basically imploding at home and not producing a lot of value, the trade deficit skyrocket even higher, and eventually, people around the world are going to question, like, what is the point of holding U.S. dollars? The idea is you buy good stuff with them. Uh, but if the petrodollar is threatened by like the China, Saudi Arabia, uh, Iranian alliance or whatever. And then you have like trade deficits on other goods. China's making massive gains on AI, for example. Um, a lot of the big video game and tech studios are working with China. As far as I know, like NetEase helped Blizzard develop Diablo Immortal. Um, uh, a game I played last Epoch. It's being invested in by what's the name of that Chinese company? The big
You
one.
don't mean you don't mean
Huh?
Alibaba.
No, not that one. It's the other big one. Alibaba's one of the two. It's the other big one. Um, they own a lot of things. They own Riot. They own a good chunk of grinding gear games. Anyway, the point is our tech capital, in order to produce tech and export tech, is being more and more reliant on like a Chinese investment already. Um, American media like Hollywood's doing okay Marvel wise, but the comic industry is not doing so good. Anime is absolutely whooping comics right now. It's absolutely insane. Um, so Japan and other Asian media are doing very well, starting to compete with us for media. So like a lot of the big stuff that we're outsourcing to the world as intellectual property. It's another thing too is if things get so destabilized around the globe, like a lot of the things that are hold the economy in place is patents, the patent system, right? Uh, if China wanted to really be aggressive, they could just say, you know what, we're going to reverse engineer patents and copy all your stuff and ship that around the world for cheaper or something, and that would be something. What's to stop that? You know, if things start really going belly up, there's so many ways in which we're vulnerable to this trade situation that like even if we wanted to start policing things at home, if we have to, our dropping out of the economy to the degree that we would in that situation would basically de facto make it impossible to like fund the military. We would basically eat ourselves with debt before too long.
Yeah. Well, and as far as rationing oil resources, the first thing that would obviously go would be consumer spending. Oil being directed towards consumer consumption that would
Yeah,
just go away. Uh, the and it would go to the government and military, and also to the large manufacturing firms that make the stuff that we need to keep the lights on. And then if it gets worse, then the large factory firms will lose oil, because the last people to lose oil are going to be the government. They're
right.
going to hoard. Yeah, they're going to hoard it all to the end. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, there's one of the things I remember hearing during the Obama administration was a lot of libertarians and Ron Paul would say that, well, in this uncertain economic situation, the businesses you gave money aren't going to invest because they're not going to plan ahead if they don't know what's going to happen. Well, that's going to be a problem for everybody because nobody's going to know what's going to happen, and we're all going to be going in this crazy direction. And so, yeah, I mean, when I hear these like people, who are in, all these different circles, dissident right, dissident left, about planning for the future, you don't know what you're talking about. The future you think you're planning for doesn't exist. The future that's coming is one that it's very difficult for even those of us like you and I, logos, who've been tracking this for so long, to even envision. And it's going to be awful.
Yep.
All right. So, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up the show?
I wish we could end on a positive note after that absolute onslaught of 40 minutes of here's why the world's terrible.
Yeah, that would be nice. Now we have one super chat by OMG Jimmy Boy for $2. Thank you, OMG Jimmy Boy. Do a show with Nick Fuentes.
That would be so hilarious.
That would be fun. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Well, I'll say thank you, Logos. It's always a pleasure. And thank you, all the viewers. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.